As many of you know, I grew up as a child of an immigrant, and my parents owned a Chinese takeout restaurant. I mean, that's where we made our living. That's where I cut my teeth. That's why I know how to cook. You look at the Chinese takeout menu, I know everything on that menu, what to make, and then some. When my parents finally retired, when I was about 26, they finally retired, and finally, my mom had this crazy idea. She wanted all of the family to be able to come home and eat dinner together. She had this it was a very simple desire of her. She wanted the whole family to come down and sit together. And so every day she will make dinner. Now notice, my mom hasn't cooked in almost 20 years because we grew up in a restaurant. My dad did the cooking. So, needless to say, the food wasn't very good. But she had this crazy idea that she made dinner and she wanted everybody to come home. And every day she would call my brother, my sister, and I and say, hey, why don't you guys come home? I've made dinner. And so there were some nights that my sister came home late. There were some nights my brother came home late. There were some nights I didn't show up for dinner. One night, as we're all sitting there, she just got furious. She got very angry and said, why can't we just eat dinner together and talk about life? At this point, I'm looking at my siblings, and my siblings are looking at me because, we've been talking about this. It was saying, what is she trying to do, calling us to come home for dinner? And it's like, you can't make up for 20 years of not eating together. So my siblings didn't know what to say, so whenever they don't know what to say, they all look at me. Because I'm the only one that can stand toe-to-toe with my mom when it comes to an argument. So they looked at me, and I gently said to my mom, I said, Mom, what do you expect after 20 years? We never ate dinner together. What do you expect after 20 years where we never really talked? You never asked me about how my life was. You never asked any one of us how our life was. The only thing that you ever saw of us is at night when we're either asleep or we're awake. Most of my childhood, I sat in front of a TV. So how do you expect me to be able to share with you how my day went? How do you expect me to have a conversation with you where I don't even know where it begins as a family? It was such a difficult word for me to say to my parents, but that was the truth. Because everything that we knew as a family, it was dysfunctional. No, don't get me wrong. My parents are great parents. I mean, they provide material and resource needs, but they were just absent. They weren't really present. So my childhood memory is mostly growing up in front of the TV because my parents would get mad at me when I went out. But there's something interesting, though, that my mother thought that the best way for us to begin to learn how to be a family together was to sit in front of a meal. It's interesting that the word companion, because we often think about family and relationships as companionship. That the Latin word for companion comes from two Latin words, com, which means together or one, and then panis, which is bread. So companionship means together with bread, or one with bread. To be in companionship with someone, to be in relationship with someone, huddles around a table. If you think about throughout centuries, throughout all of time, it's often settled around a meal. But in our modern day and age where everything's fast food, fast relationships, time is so important. We eat on the go, we're eating in our cars, we're doing whatever it is just to stuff food down our mouth because we need food. But often we forget that with food, there should be companionship. With food, there should be a sharing of life together. And I think probably that is why there has been a breaking down of just relationships, breaking down of our society, is quite honestly, we don't spend enough time eating together. Now, many of us will wonder, what does this have to do with being on missions? What does this have to do in living a missional lifestyle? Because I believe that although this is not the only way to build relationships, but this is probably the best way to build relationships with people for the sake of the kingdom. And as many of you know, we're going through our sermon series, and it's called Renovation, Our Calling Under Construction. It's designed to help us to take a step back and to look at our life and to align our life with the Great Commission. It's to take a step back and realize that in order for us as individuals, that in order for us to be on missions with God, that you and I need to begin to incorporate rhythms and practices in our life. Because it's, quite honestly, it's easy to go to church on a Sunday, right? Now, most of us would disagree. I said, it's quite easy showing up to church on Sunday. You just sit there. If you don't want to talk to anyone, you just put up a frown and, we all know how to put, antennas, like, don't bother me. It's easy to do that. It's easy to show up to church. It's also quite easy to, quote, unquote, be involved in a outreach ministry, right? Some of you who grew up in church, you know things like coffee house. Some of you who grew up in church, you know about passing out tracts. Some of you who grew up in church, you know to have an event, and all you have to do is invite someone. That's it. And you've done your part. You feel great. I've been a part of something of building the kingdom of God. But how often does that happen? Whenever the church plans an event? Because, mind you, if the church plans too many outreach events, then people are going to get pissed off. I'm not being fed. All you talk about is the people outside. What about me? I'm the one giving money here. Of course, people don't say that, but that's what they really mean. But in order for us to really be on missions with God, it requires each and every one of us to begin to practice rhythms. And I believe one valuable rhythm for us to be on missions with God is simply what we call table talk. And that is inviting people to the table, right? I want us to take a look at John chapter 21. Why am I pointing to all of us to these familiar passages that we've heard preachers preach many, many times? The reason is we miss something that is so important. So, John chapter 21, the context, we all know this, is Jesus has appeared to different disciples, and now it is showdown time with Peter, the man who said, I will never betray you, Jesus. And oops, I did. And so here it is. This is the context in which chapter 21 takes place. I'm going to start reading from verse 4, okay? And it says, early in the morning, Jesus stood on the shore, but the disciples did not realize it was Jesus. And he called out to them, friend, haven't you any fish? No, they answered. And he said, throw your net on the right side of the boat, and you will find some. When they did, they were unable to haul the net in because of the large number of fish. Then the disciple whom Jesus loved said to Peter, it's the Lord. And as soon as Simon Peter heard this, it's the Lord, he wrapped his outer garment around him, for he had taken off, and he jumped into the water. The other disciples followed in the boat, towing the net full of fish, for they were not far from the shore, about 100 yards. When they landed, they saw a fire of burning coals there with fish on it and some bread. Jesus said to them, bring some of the fish you have caught. So Simon Peter climbed back into the boat and dragged the net ashore. It was full of a large fish, 153. But even with so many, the net was not torn. Jesus said to them, come and have breakfast. None of the disciples dared ask him, who are you? They knew it was the Lord, and Jesus came, took the bread, gave it to them, and he did the same with the fish. This now, the third time Jesus appeared to his disciples after he was raised from the dead. When they had finished eating, Jesus said to Simon Peter, "Simon, son of John, do you love me more than these?" "Yes, Lord," he said. "You know that I love you." Jesus said, "Feed my sheep, my lamb." Again, Jesus said, "Simon, son of John, do you love me?" He answered, "Yes, Lord, you know that I love you. Take care of my sheep." The third time he said to him, "Simon, son of John, do you love me?" Peter was hurt because Jesus asked him the third time, "Do you love me?" He said, "Lord, you know all things, and you know that I love you." Jesus said, "Feed my sheep. Very truly I tell you, when you are younger, you will dress yourself and went where you wanted. But when you are old, you will stretch out your hands, and someone else will dress you and lead you where you did not go." Jesus said this to indicate the kind of death which Peter would glorify God. Then he said to him, "Follow me." Often when we look at this passage, we focus directly at Jesus restoring Peter. But we don't notice the context of this. We don't recognize the simple context in how Jesus moved from having a quote-unquote encounter with Peter on a spiritual level. Right? We don't see the simple things. Right? Now, if you think about it, before Jesus died, what was he doing? Before he got arrested, what was he doing with the disciples? He was eating. When he starts showing up to the disciples, we're told that this is the third time he's appeared to the disciples, right? So, guess what? This is before I think he appeared to Thomas, right? But he appeared, we know, to Mary. So that was the first time. The second time, I think we are told that he appeared to the two disciples on the road to Emmaus, in which he had a meal with them. He invited them to have a meal. Now, this is the third time we see Jesus appear to the disciples, Peter specifically, and he invites him to a meal. Before all the nitty-gritty of spiritual stuff and confrontation and restoration took place, they were invited to a meal. What was the first thing that God said to Adam and Eve? To eat. Everything I have given to you, you may eat except. What was the last few words that the Spirit said in Revelation? To drink. All those who are thirsty, come and drink. It's interesting how food plays such a big part. What was people's biggest problem with Jesus when he was alive on earth? He was eating and drinking with the wrong people. It wasn't that he was eating and drinking. It was just eating and drinking with the wrong people. Right? If you notice, he had a meal with Zacchaeus, and Zacchaeus had a profound encounter. He was at a meal reclining when the woman was weeping before his feet. All this was in the context of a meal. In fact, the greatest symbol of our Christian faith is the bread and the cup, which is a meal. So it would seem that almost everything spiritual took place in the context of a meal. If that is the case, then maybe we've been being on missions with God in all the wrong ways. Maybe it's not just about passing out tracts. Maybe it's not just about memorizing the 4 spiritual laws and then boom, laying it down on people. Maybe it's not about knocking on people's doors and saying, "Do you know where you will go if you were to die today?" Maybe it's not about having something attractive so that somebody actually may like it and to come and then all of a sudden you do the switch and bait on them. It's like inviting people to a basketball team and then all of a sudden you give a switch and bait and you say you got to show up to church. Maybe it's not that. Maybe it's so simple that we missed it, that we try to overcomplicate it because maybe the reason is most of us as followers of Christ do not want to be on mission with God. And so then the church as an organization needs to take over. And when the church as an organization needs to take over, an organization will always plan events and activities to get participation. And maybe that's what's going on with our modern day church when we think about being on missions with God. Because to be on missions with God isn't, quote, unquote, the church organization's responsibility, but it is each one of our responsibility. And if it's in each one of our responsibilities, maybe we've been approaching it all the wrong ways. Maybe we've been overcomplicating something so simple. And maybe all it starts with is inviting people to the table and sharing a meal together. So simple. Because if you look at here, all the encounters that we see that Jesus is having with people throughout a meal, Jesus was present and the Spirit was at work and leading the conversation to a certain way. That Jesus, because here Peter experienced forgiveness and restoration. Because through the meal, he had an encounter with Jesus. Maybe, just maybe, when we begin to share a meal with people, that they would also have an encounter with Jesus. Maybe an encounter with Jesus would be as simple as them just telling you what is going on with their life. Maybe it's that simple. I have found that whenever I eat with people, no matter how pissed off they are at me, the mood always gets a little lighter. I've often found that too, whenever a person's very defensive about any situation, when we're eating, they begin to get less angry. By the way, it's a scientific fact, right? When people eat, somehow the chemical release, I don't know, you should ask the doctor, I ain't smart enough. But somehow it causes the anger to begin to subside a little bit, right? That's why men get hangry. And, when men are angry, they fight wars. But the reality is this. Somehow that in the midst of a meal, that we invite people into a meal, we are also inviting a person into our life. And as we invite them into our life, we're also inviting them into the context of our story. And our story is filled with God's story. That is our story. That we cannot escape that. That whenever we talk to someone, we are speaking God's story, right? Now, don't get me wrong. You don't need to use religious words. You don't need to say anything about, quote, religious in order to get spiritual with someone, right? Because to get spiritual with someone is basically sharing their story, their struggle. Because when a person shares their struggle, they're sharing about the effect that sin has upon them. When we are sharing our joy, we are sharing the effect that the lordship and the reign of Jesus has over us. And by doing that, isn't them now having an encounter with the story of God? Yes, it is. That's sharing the message of Christ. Quote, without sharing the message of Christ. Because Paul says, for we have been given this gospel, this message. For we are ambassadors. This message isn't, quote, the words that we speak. This message has been embodied in us because we are living the good news. We are experiencing the good news of Christ. We're experiencing God working in us. We're experiencing God moving in us. And if that is the case, whenever we share with people, we are sharing the message and the power of Christ. Because if they begin to ask you, so why are you so happy? Now they're giving you permission to reveal the source of your joy, of your story. Brothers and sisters, it's not that hard. It's not that hard to share with people your life. It's not that hard. It's not that hard to even share your brokenness. It becomes so much more easier when we're sitting at the table and there's food. I've often found the most spiritual conversations I have with people somehow centered around food. I remember there was once this youth that I was a pastor of, and he told me he no longer wanted to be a Christian and he didn't want to go to church. And so I was, at this time, I was trying to church plan and begin to meet with people. And he came over from my house, and he's like, "Pastor, I really appreciate you because you watched me grow up, but I don't want to talk about anything spiritual. Don't give me any of the Jesus answer. I'm tired of it." And I looked at him. I said, "You know who you're talking to?" I said, "You're talking to the pastor. Everything I speak is going to be spiritual." Right? I mean, hello? But then we began to talk, and I began to share with him how I grew up, my life, my relationship with my father. And then he began to talk about his relationship with his father. Apparently his father was an elder of a church, and all he could remember was the screaming, yelling at home. And that when he was a child, he hid in his closet and just wanted the screaming to stop. And as he began to talk about it, he began to weep. Now, I didn't prompt that. We were just catching up, and I was just sharing my childhood. But he opened up. It's not the first instance I've seen that. It was so easy in the context of a meal. That as I share my life, what's going on, people will begin to talk about their life. And when people talk about their life, it's a spiritual matter. I don't care how unspiritual you are or how quote-unquote atheist you are. When people start talking about themselves, what they like, what their problems are, I'm sorry, it's a spiritual conversation. It's a spiritual conversation. And when I talk to people about my life, it's a spiritual conversation. Because by me talking about it, I'm going to talk about Jesus one way or another. I may not invoke his name, but you're going to hear the story of God in my life. You're going to hear the story of God in my life. But as we invite people to a table, somehow people get disarmed. All of their protectiveness, all of their anxiety, all of their uncertainty somehow begins to fade away, because somehow there's almost something ingrained in us that when I'm sitting across someone in the context of a meal, you are no longer my enemy. I may not be certain of you, but now I'm willing to take that risk to share with you who I really am. I mean, that's why we don't always just eat with anyone. But when we do eat with people, we are making a statement. You're not my enemy. We may not be friends yet, but you certainly are not my enemy. That's such a powerful statement to make. I mean, God knows what's going on in America right now. I mean, it's just hate. People just hate each other. We just hate each other. Let's be honest, we just hate each other. We hate the fact that we're different. We just hate each other. So when we hate each other, we all just take a step back and we just look at everybody as our enemy. But when we begin to invite people to a meal, to a table, we're saying, I don't hate you. You're not my enemy. I may not like you right now, and it's because I don't know you. But when you begin to know me and I begin to know you, our stories intertwine. And because our stories intertwine, and because my story is profoundly filled with the story of God, guess what? You've just experienced the story of God in your life. It's subtle. I may not have to say anything, but you just got a glimpse of the King who sits upon the throne. You just got a glimpse, an encounter of what the Holy Spirit is doing. That's amazing. You know, one of the greatest rivalries that ever took place in sports history was between Magic Johnson and Larry Bird. I mean, you know, it's a big deal when ESPN did a documentary about their rivalry. They hated each other. Ever since high school, they played against each other. They just disliked each other. In college, they went against head to head. They hated each other. And as God will have it, they were both on the teams that hated each other because they were just both, dominated the basketball world. You got the Boston Celtics and the LA Lakers. And back in the days when Converse was the sneaker to have, they were sponsored by Converse, right? And as they played against each other, that the hatred, the competition took over even more, and they began to really hate each other. You would see battles on the court that they'll be screaming, yelling, cursing. And they'll trash talk, and they'll really get physical with each other because in the old NBA, you could body slam somebody and it would just be a foul. Okay? So, right, this is intense. And so Converse wanted to do a commercial between these two as they began to play, so to promote. And so they had Larry Bird wear the white Converse sneakers and Magic Johnson wear the black Converse sneakers. But Larry Bird was so adamant that the commercial be filmed in his home, in his farm. And so they did, and they began to film, and people were saying it was like just these two together. It was kind of like they didn't talk to each other. They had this look on, I'm here just to get paid. I don't like you, you don't like me, don't talk to me. And they were just, throughout the whole morning, they were shooting. And so they went on a lunch break, and as they were about to go to a lunch break, Magic Johnson was going their own way, the crew was going their own way, and Larry Bird, as soon as he was home, was going to go inside and, eat lunch. And then all of a sudden, Larry Bird's mom comes out and said, everybody's invited to lunch because I made lunch for everybody. So, when somebody says that, nobody's going to leave. So they went in, they had lunch, and as they began to sit at the table, Magic Johnson and Larry Bird, something began to change. And this is what Larry Bird said. He said, on that day I realized that I hated Magic Johnson. But the person who was sitting across me was Irvin Johnson. Irvin Johnson I liked a lot. That's the first time that actually these two sat down. We're talking about heated rivalry. They hate each other. And Larry Bird got to know Magic Johnson. And he said, Irvin Johnson, I like a lot. It's amazing what a meal can do. What a meal can do. Now, most of us in our modern day and age, we eat on the run. But imagine if you and I began to just slow down. That we began to slow down. It could be as simple as when our co-workers are eating lunch and we're in the cafeteria together and we just, hey, can I sit next to you? And you don't need to say anything spiritual. You don't need to, because as I said, when a person talks about life, it's spiritual. Or maybe another step even more. Maybe invite somebody into your table at home. That's scary. Invite somebody into your, and guess what? When somebody, most of the time, when somebody comes to your home and enters into your table, they will follow whatever rules that your family dictates. Is it a yes? You invite. So what I do with my kids is that when we gather around the family table, we all say something that we give thanks to Jesus for. That's it. So I would say, we give thanks to Jesus for this, and then we pick a friend. And then my daughter will say, and then she will pick some, and then we just, from there. I've already invited Jesus into the conversation. Very informally, this is my family. And they are sitting at my table. And we can talk about anything. We can enjoy a conversation. But by the sheer fact that they are eating with me and my family, they are being exposed to the story of God. So if we want to be on mission, maybe we can, instead of bringing restoration one life at a time, maybe we can bring restoration one meal at a time. One meal at a time. Because we all need to eat. Some of us more than others. But we all need to eat. We all need to eat. Not only do we all need to eat, when we share a meal with someone, we're saying to them, I want you to become my companion, my friend. I want to get to know you. I want you to know my story. Because eventually, word is going to get out that they're going to know that you believe in Jesus. And eventually they're going to know why you believe in Jesus. And eventually they're going to go, that's pretty cool what you got there. Right? We don't need to close the deal right there and then. We just need to do it one meal at a time. Because God is present in the world, reconciling the world to himself. God is at work. He just simply needs us to join into what he's doing. And one of the best ways that you and I can join in what he's doing is by inviting people to a meal. And just simply sharing our story and allowing them to share their story. Because the Spirit is moving. The Spirit is working. And the Spirit will lead us in giving us words to what to say and what to do. You invite the worship team to come up. It's funny, the same person that I invited to the table, we will often go out to lunch too. And he'll often say the same things. I really don't want to talk about God. I don't want to go to church. And I said to him, I'm sorry, but I don't want to hurt your feelings. But you and I are doing church right now. He said, no way. I said, you respect me as a pastor? I said, most people in church respect the pastor. I said, in church, what do? They pray. Talk a little bit about Jesus. They hang out, they chit-chat. I said, when the food came, didn't I just pray? I said, we're sitting here. You're talking about your life, and I'm telling you about my life. Right? Once in a while, you ask me questions about the Bible. I said, right here and right now, you and I just did church. You asked for it, I mean. If you think about it, when we invite people into our life, we're also inviting them into the larger body of Christ. It's not as hard as we think it is. It's not as scary as we think it is. Because somehow, when we eat a meal, we relax too. And we're not afraid of what to say or feeling awkward. And all of our insecurities also subside as well. And we're just ourselves. In reality, we all just need to be ourselves too. Because God's story is deeply embedded in us, the real self. So imagine when you're at your work and you're seeing the people there, and maybe there's someone that you're talking to, you know a little bit better. If you just say, hey, lunch break, hey, you grab your sandwich, great, let's eat together, right? Because it's such an awkward thing eating alone. I think it's probably more popular now, but I remember when I first became a pastor, and we have odd schedules. I didn't have weekends off and things like that, and I got Mondays off, and all my friends were at work and everything. But I wanted to go out and eat because I was lazy. I didn't want to cook. And I was saying to myself, man, it is so awkward to walk into a restaurant and just go, one please. I was like, what do I do? Do I bring a book, pretend like I'm reading? I mean, that's probably the fastest meal I've ever eaten when I'm outside. It took me 10 minutes to finish the food, and I was gone. I know that's a lot more common nowadays, where people just want to put on the earphones and turn on looking at their phones and things like that, just block up the whole world. Maybe it isn't because they say, I don't want anybody to bother me. Maybe they're just feeling that nobody will even care to bother you. Why don't you just shut everything out? So imagine the people at your work. Imagine even inviting people to your table. I know that every time when I invite somebody to my table, my daughters are watching. I've taught them so much more about the kingdom of God and how to be faithful than any words I can ever tell them. Because they see me praying for them. They see me having a conversation with them. They see that, and I don't need to say a word. They see, they experience. I won't have to pull them tooth and nail about why they should be a part of the kingdom of God, because they see it. I know it's a very scary thing to have people over your house and to even have people in your life and eating the meal with people. But imagine we actually began to do that with our home. Begin to even invite people into our home. Imagine the stories that we would hear about their life, things we never knew about them. And then imagine them hearing our story. And then imagine them saying to us, about this Jesus, because whatever he's doing, your life just told me that he's amazing. It's not that hard. It's only hard when we don't want to. So as the worship team is leading us in a time response, whatever that blockage is, I invite you to just leave that here today. Just say, Jesus, this is what's preventing me from doing this. And I'm going to leave it here today at your feet.